Get Out of Your Head is the name of both my brand and my book series. I run, a mental health brand, social media, got the books, a blog, all that under this moniker, Get Out of Your Head. There are actually two books. There is Get Out of Your Head, a toolkit for living with and overcoming anxiety. And then there's also a second book, which is called Get Out of Your Head, Volume 2, Navigating the Abyss of Depression. When I was a senior in high school, I went on a date with this girl that I had kind of been seeing. I got really nervous to the point where I had a panic attack. I didn't know what the term panic attack was or meant at the time. I just knew that I'm on this date. I feel so horrible. My heart is racing. I can't think. I feel like I'm going to have a heart attack.
Welcome, everyone, to the One Moment Podcast. I am your boy and your co-host, Kevin. Everybody knows me. And we have an amazing guest speaker today. He is joining us. And we're going to be getting into a lot of in-depth conversations with his personal experience with mental health, anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation. So listen, let me preface today, okay? We always try to give a disclaimer out just because we're on social media. So if anybody is triggered at all by listening or watching this episode, please reach out for help immediately if you need help. You can reach out to a loved one. You can reach out to a mentor, a sponsor, a friend, and you can also utilize 988, which is the National Crisis and Suicide Hotline. You can reach out by calling SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, National Alliance in Mental Illness, also known as NAMI. You also have local crisis centers and local emergency departments. So please feel free to reach out. Everything we discussed today is educational. Everything we do on this show is educational in nature. None of it ever should be ever used for professional guidance, professional assistance, clinical or medical guidance or assistance at all. It's all informational and educational only, as we are here to help break stigmas, break barriers, and carry the message of hope to people who are suffering, the people who are struggling, who might not, feel like they, are heard. So we try to give the voice to people who don't have one or feel like they don't have one. Now, we are talking today with Mr. Brian Sachetta. I hope I pronounced that right. Sweet. And he is the author of Get Out of Your Head. Now, I'm loving this, okay? Just off the name of the book, I'm like, hey, this is my dude. I need some therapy right now. I need some therapy. So let's just sit down and let's have a one-on-one, right? And as I was telling him, as we were just previously talking, so many people stay wrapped up in their head. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, that's a bad thing because, the solution isn't staying in our head. The solution is taking action, or the solution is talking to somebody. So I don't want to tell too much of the story. I don't want to, give away too many answers from a clinical perspective, right? I want to hear it from him because this is his show that we're on. Well, I mean, I know it's the One Moment Podcast, but he's the guest speaker, so it's his show. I'm here to go wherever the conversation goes. So, Mr. Brian, how are you doing, sir?
Doing good. Thanks, Kevin. It's been a busy week, a little bit of a stressful week, but I think that these conversations they can be a nice place to unwind a little bit and unpack some of the feelings and all that. And so it'll be its own stress relief, both for me, for yourself, and hopefully for some of the listeners.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's one of the first things that come to my mind when I think about that is burnout. In working in the field and working in any job, you can easily get burned out from the work that you do. And so you're right. Doing this thing, coming on these podcasts, talking and sharing, and it's doing something different than what we do in our normal everyday life. And it's something that I enjoy doing. Yeah, I work as a mental health therapist, but I'm doing the video editing. I'm trying to put the content out there. I'm doing all of that. I don't do that where I work. So you are right. I definitely would have to second that. Now, I want to get into it. Um, and before I get into it, thank you again for being here. Um, you wrote "Get Out of Your Head." Let's start there, because that, I think, if we start there, builds into other areas of mental health, depression, suicidality, things like that. So tell us about that. Where can people find it? When did you publish it? What is it about? Kind of let's explore that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to say a bunch of things, and then we'll pick a path, right? So, Get Out of Your Head is the name of both my brand and my book series. So I run, a mental health brand, social media, got the books, a blog, all that under this moniker, Get Out of Your Head. And then specifically, what you're asking about is the book, right? So there are actually two books. There is Get Out of Your Head, a toolkit for living with and overcoming anxiety. I think we can start there. And then there's also a second book, which is called Get Out of Your Head, Volume 2, Navigating the Abyss of Depression. So, I've got these two books. I basically try to tackle each of these conditions with, each respective book. And with the first book, kind of diving into that a little bit, right? When I was a teenager, and, it's not like my anxiety is entirely gone. That's just life. People, you know, endure nervousness and anxiety and all that sort of thing. All those sorts of things, especially, as your circumstances in life change, you're in new experiences, you have new challenges and all that. But when I was a teenager, right, I really, really struggled with anxiety because I had no understanding of what it was. I had no tools that I could use to cope. I had no strategies for or perspectives for looking at anxiety at a higher level. And so essentially, I had this, I would say, eye-opening moment more so than necessarily transformative moment. And there were kind of two of them. But so, I've always been a socially anxious person, and I've always been a bit of an anxious dater. And so when I was a senior in high school, I went on a date with this girl that I had kind of been seeing. I was very interested in her. I got really nervous to the point where I had a panic attack. I didn't know what the term panic attack was or meant at the time. I just knew that I'm on this date. I feel so horrible. My heart is racing. I can't think. I feel like I'm going to have a heart attack, And so that panic attack, like it was obvious that I was not in a great place while I was on that date. And so the girl kind of, looked at me and was like, "What's going on?" And it all came out. And eventually, not necessarily 100% because of the panic attack, but for a combination of different reasons. In that moment on that date, she was kind of like, "Well, this isn't really working out. We should move on." And that was really challenging and difficult. And I think to a young person's brain, and I mean, it still happens to me and other people as well, we create these associations, in our minds to say, I did this one thing and I got this result. Therefore, the thing that I did must equal that result. So from an early age, I was building this association that wasn't helpful, right? And I said, dating equals pain. Dating equals panic attack. Dating equals hardship, failure, all of those things. Fast forward 6 months later, I go off to college. I meet this other girl that I'm interested in, and she comes over one night. Boom, same kind of thing. I have another panic attack in front of this girl. She did not handle this one very well. She had, a couple drinks in her and was more animated, let's say. She started calling me names. She was not in the right headspace. It's not to speak poorly of her, but it was a very, very tough moment for me. And she ran off, and I'm like totally beside myself, saying, I thought I was going to go off to college, kind of put this anxiety or nervousness thing behind me. And yet here I am, like enduring yet another one of these difficult experiences, if not harrowing experiences for me, right? We all struggle with different things. And I would say at age 18, when the girl that you like doesn't want anything to do with you, that is real, real painful. It feels like the end of the world. And I guess I would also say just that, love in general is very difficult. And so even at my age now or a later age, if somebody has that reaction, it's understandable that that would be really painful for me or you or anybody else. But at that age, I just had no idea how to handle it. Anyway, I wake up the next morning. I'm so beside myself. I am so sad, so disappointed, so frustrated, thinking to myself, what is this? How am I going to get through it? And that kind of became the entry point of my first book. Me sitting down at my desk at college, pretty much the first or second week of freshman year, and saying to myself, I thought I was going to go off to college and not have to deal with nervousness. And yet here I am, it's staring me in the face. So long story short, over the next 10 years, I basically, identified the fact that I really deal with anxiety or I struggle with it, and came to the conclusion that I needed to, I'm not going to say face it head on like a courageous act, but, really think about it and not ignore it, and go about trying to figure out some strategies and tactics for myself that would allow me to work through it. And so over the course of the next decade, I really did that. And all the stories and all the experiences that I went through during that journey, if you will, ended up becoming the content in that first book, my Get Out of Your Head book. So it's filled with, perspectives and tactics and stories and research and all of that stuff. And I will say, just, we can definitely dive into the specific contents of that book, but it was a real transformative journey for me, right? I went from being a kid, an 18-year-old boy, not having any idea what this stuff was, to, really getting something of a grip on it and wanting to turn around and say, hey, I know how painful it is. I've been through it before. I know a lot of other people out there listening, reading, what have you, have been through that as well. I'm not saying I'm an expert. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I do have some answers that I want to share. And that's what led me to eventually write that book.
Anxiety is and can be crippling. And that is unfortunate. And I'm glad that you shared some of your experiences and of what the book is about. I've always said this. I'm the kind of guy who I can see a pretty lady, and in my head, I done got the marriage, the kids, the house, the career, like I got it all figured out, right? Can get around the lake, come back and meet her, right? And I got no words to say. It's that crippling anxiety, that fear of, and 100, 200 different forms of fear. And of course, there's self-delusion in there too. So when you were sharing that, that was what my brain was thinking as my personal experience with anxiety. Now, I'm not saying that that is any worse than yours by any means. I don't even know if what I had was social anxiety. Now, I just used my personality to kind of weave through this, these anxious moments, and it works. It does work. So let's let me ask you this: when you share social anxiety, or when you shared that you have social anxiety, how old were you when you first experienced it, and when did you really recognize that it was social anxiety?
It's a good question. I would say somewhere in high school. I don't have a specific day. I just know that there would be events, right? Social events that would be on the calendar. If it was a school dance or a semi-formal or a presentation I had to give in class. And, I think, again, going back to the idea that most of us get nervous about things, that's kind of human nature, right? You think about some event or experience that is on the horizon, that is important to you and is uncertain, and you get nervous. That's life, and it is hard. When you start thinking about, and a lot of, if a doctor or a psychiatrist were to start thinking about, do I maybe diagnose this person, right? The diagnosis always comes at the moment when that person, that clinician, is able to say, this condition, this amount of nervousness is affecting Brian or Kevin's life in such a way that he or she cannot move forward in the capacity that he or she wants to, or in a normal way, right? And so the reason that I say that is because, I think about some of the, let's say, class presentations I had to give. And I would say, like most people, like most of my classmates, for a few minutes before the presentation, I'd be really nervous. Maybe an hour before, I'd be really nervous, right? But when those events started to draw out further in time and that fear started to intensify and be longer in duration, that's when I said to myself, this is kind of not right, Where, just as an example, like I used to run cross country in high school, and none of us liked to, go through the process of running at a cross country meet. You basically had, no music, no headphones. You just had to go as hard as you could go for like 3 miles, running, in a neighborhood or in the woods, some random track, whatever it was, right? And to exert yourself for that long and endure that kind of pain, like not too many people enjoy that, right? At the very least, I would say that, maybe some of us enjoy doing that on our own if we have music or we have something to entertain us. But when you think about you're out in the woods, you're by yourself, you're competing against all these other kids, you don't want to make a fool out of yourself, you want to do well, all those things, right? Again, kind of comparisonitis or whatever. When I looked at those track meets, those cross country meets, I would be nervous. Like the minute that I finished a race, I'd have like maybe the rest of the night, I'd have a little bit of a high saying to myself, it's done. The next one isn't for a while, that kind of thing. I'd wake up the next day and be like, there's a race next week. And I would be so nervous about it where my stomach would be in knots until that race came to pass. And that was, again, somewhere in that high school period of basketball games and track meets and dances and semi-formals and whatnot, when I was looking ahead and saying there's some event that's many days away and I'm insanely nervous for it, that's where I started to get that little spidey sense of, okay, something might not be quite right here, right? And going back to the idea of, is this thing really affecting your life in a negative fashion such that you feel as though you can't quite live normally? That's where I was at, of, hey, the track meet is in 6 days. Like, I shouldn't be nervous right now. I should be focusing on things that I am doing, and when you experience that much fear and that much nervousness and anxiety, that's where you start to get a little bit desperate, right? And say, how do I make this go away? How do I cope with this? How do I make myself feel better? So that was, those feelings were bubbling up as I was in high school and college and all that. And eventually, I experienced enough pain kind of acutely, right, through those panic attacks to say, look, dude, like, you got to do something about this. You can't just go about your day and keep getting punched in the face day after day after day by your nervousness. You have to take action and figure out how it is that you're going to cope with this thing long term.
Wow. And that's the difference between natural anxiety versus crippling anxiety. You're right. Anxiety is natural. It is healthy. It is absolutely every part of being human. And it's to help us. Research shows that having a little anxiety helps stimulate the thought process. It helps stimulate an experience so that we can, it increases our orientation to detail. It increases our ability to focus. It increases our ability to manage the cognitive load of whatever the task is. But when we are crippled with anxiety, it's a phrase I like, paralysis by analysis. And I think that really fits because you're really just thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. It's almost like substance use, right? Like you're mentally obsessing over the situation, over the event. So let me ask you this, because you shared a lot of great information there, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, right? But you shared panic attacks, right? You shared that you have had panic attacks throughout your life. What, for the general public, on an educational perspective, what or how did that panic attack look for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a bunch of them over the course of my life, and for me, they manifest in slightly different ways, as I think we could say for the general population, right? There's not necessarily one signature of this is exactly what a panic attack looks like. We kind of have to speak to it a little bit more broadly, right? So if anxiety is feeling fear over something that is not yet here today, then a panic attack is basically anxiety dialed up to 10 and given to you in an acute time frame, right? So you are as anxious, as nervous, as scared as you have basically ever been. And it will last probably 1 to 20 minutes or something, right? And for me, the common symptoms are or were racing heartbeat, inability to think, sweating all over, complete insane levels of fear, fear of a loss of control, feel as though things are going to go horribly wrong, a sense of doom, a fear that like I am falling apart and I'm going to end up in an institution, again, going back to that sense of a loss of control. And so, yeah, it's really just being as scared as you have ever been for 1 to 20 minutes. You get the physiological symptoms as well. But, it's really like, it's the thing that's most frightening about it is this narrative comes into your mind and basically tells you, and that's the fear piece is it tells you that this is not going to change. This is not going to get better. You're doomed. You are going to be subjected to this again and again and again. Or even if you aren't, like you're just not going to get out of the current panic attack. And one thing I want to talk about on this front, right, is there's a thing called panic disorder. And that's essentially, just as an anxiety disorder is having way too much anxiety such that you are prohibited from living your life as normal. A panic disorder is that, but applied to panic attacks, right? And so if you are looking around every corner of your life and your day and saying, oh my goodness, like where is panic going to pop up next, right? You start living in fear of that next panic moment. And it's very hard to get out of that because, you're so fixated on the panic. But the research kind of shows that the real solution to that, even though it sounds simple and, seems a little bit like we're glossing over things, is to find a way to break the loop of fearing the next one, right? And that basically comes down to understanding that you have been in it before, that things always do get better and improve, even if when you're having that panic attack, it doesn't look like they're going to. And when you're having that panic attack, it looks like everything is lost and you feel so horrible, right? You eventually, and I'm really, really not trying to glamorize this because it is hard. But the real work and the real solution is to find a way to basically get yourself to that next panic attack and just sit in it and be like, this is so horrible. This sucks so much. And yet I'm just not going to react. I'm just going to sit here. I'm going to feel it. It's going to go away at some point. And then you start looking at all the future ones and you say, I can do that again in some small level. I'm not saying I can, snap my fingers and get out of it, but I can just sit there. And the more that you do that, the more that you desensitize yourself to the next one. And I think in a lot of ways, that's appropriate or relevant to anxiety as well, right? When you stop looking for anxiety in every situation in your life, it stops coming to you as often. And so the reason why, I named my brand and my book series Get Out of Your Head is the idea, right? You kind of talked about being addicted to turning things over or processing things and thinking about them endlessly, right? It's like good and bad, right? Is we are, especially if you go out and you have a job every day where you're putting your critical thinking skills to the test. If you're solving problems, if you're doing complex things, if you're using a computer, you're probably training yourself day after day after day. And this isn't a bad thing, but again, pros and cons is you're training yourself every day to be rewarded for that critical thinking. When it comes to anxiety, we want to apply that same critical thinking to our fears. And yet you can't solve emotions, right? You cannot solve emotional problems with rational thinking. Emotional problems can only be dealt with in an emotional way. And so the real reason I named my brand and my book series Get Out of Your Head is because when anybody goes down this path for long enough to say, okay, anxiety, here you are. I'm going to solve you. I'm going to figure you out. I got this. Here are my critical thinking skills. I'm going to make it all go away by being smart, by outwitting my anxiety. You realize that you just go way, way down a rabbit hole that there's no end to, And so at some point you say to yourself, I'm thinking about this as hard as I can. I'm not succeeding. The only other thing that I can do in this situation is stop thinking about it, get out of my head, and see what happens. And a lot of the research will show that when you do that, again, it's not like you snap your fingers and you're done with anxiety, but that is kind of the path, if you will, that you need to walk. And the last thing that I would say just to close this out is there's a quote that often gets attributed to Albert Einstein. It goes something like, you can't solve a problem with the same level of consciousness that created it. And that's basically get out of your head in a nutshell is if you created your anxiety by thinking about scary things, continuing to think about those scary things is not going to make those things go away. It is also not going to make that fear associated with those scary things go away. And so you have to attack that problem, if you will, from a different level of thinking and consciousness, which is basically to say, get out of your head.
I love it. And it's interesting because I was thinking about when we talk about panic attack, anxiety, I think having a panic attack every so often, and I'm not an expert in panic attacks or panic disorder or anything of that sort, but I would think through my own experience that it will be okay or normal if you have one every so often. And the reason I say that because I've only had one in my life that I know of, and the last one it was about a year ago. And I'm not going to mention where I was at or anything, but I literally felt that my heart was racing. I felt like my body temperature was high, and it literally brought back flashbacks and memories and obsessive thoughts. And I literally felt the walls closing in, right? Like you could feel the walls closing in, vision tunnel kicking in. And so I love that you shared what a panic attack is, because I think it's, people need to know, like, right? People need to know what it is and some of the reasons behind why you have a panic attack. And if it's happening, very often, then of course you need to seek immediate help. You need to, seek a psychiatrist, psychologist, anything like that. And so I appreciate you sharing that. Let me ask you this then. Oh, before I go there, I will say my solution in that moment was picking up the phone, the 10,000 pound telephone, and making a phone call to a friend, a trusted friend, and say, hey, I am literally having a panic attack. I need you to calm me down. I need you to ground me, right? I had the cognitive awareness to be able to do that. So I preface that because I wanted to ask you this. What solutions did you find early on to help you get through the anxiety attacks? Was it a psychiatrist and taking the, Xanaxes, benzodiazepines, Valiums? Was it substance use? Like, what was some of your first uh, solutions to helping you get over or cope with the anxiety and panic attacks?
Yeah, I gotta say, I do not recommend this, but I essentially white knuckled it in the sense that let me look back, right, and say, okay, when I started to struggle with my anxiety, it was 2008. It's now 2025. That was 17 years ago. The world was a very different place. The internet was a very different place. The conversation around mental health was in a very different place. And so at that time, I felt like there were no resources. The only real part of mental health that was in the zeitgeist was, people in movies and TV shows going to a shrink. And they used that word, you know? And so it just seemed out of reach to even approach that. And it's not like I never went to therapy, but I would say at first, when it was 2008 and I was basically 18 years old, the world was so different, and conversations around masculinity and femininity and all that were very different. And I think it's not like they're completely transformed these days, but in 2008, especially when you're a freshman in college, there was no such thing as admitting your vulnerabilities and opening up to people about your fears and how you're feeling. To be honest, hanging out with a bunch of dudes in college, I'm not speaking poorly of any of them. It was just kind of a cultural thing, right? Is at that age, if you said something about anxiety, nervousness, what have you, I mean, you were a wimp. You couldn't do that, And so I think what was helpful for me over time, this was not the full solution, but was helpful over time, was learning that other people experience these things as well. Seeing how the conversation around mental health, both on, through books and journal articles and all that, but also on social media, more people started talking about these things and they became a part of the culture where, I mean, you talk to folks who are, Gen Z these days, and like having anxiety is like almost a badge of honor, or like a rite of passage or something, where they're like, oh, it's just my anxiety, whatever. Like, and everybody's, dropping these words into their lexicon as if like, mental health is just something that everybody in Gen Z deals with. And I think there is a shred of truth to that, where we all struggle on some level. But again, going back to 2008, it felt so unapproachable, to be able to speak up and talk about these things. And so that's why I really started to white knuckle it. And I said to myself, don't speak up, don't tell anybody, just go on the internet, find some books or whatever, some resources to try to help get yourself through this thing. And early on, really the only real resource I had, other than, to be honest, like some crappy ebooks that I bought on like random people's websites through PayPal, for like $75 or whatever, was within about a year of really struggling with anxiety. My mom just could really sense that I was, not in the right place. And so she asked me, and all the feelings came out, and we talked about it. And, she was very supportive. She's always been very supportive. And that was crucial early on, just to know that, look, I'm not, I wasn't going to call her every single day. That's just wasn't who I was. Not that I didn't want to, but I didn't want to necessarily every minute of the day be like, Mom, anxiety, 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 And so I just knew that I had a lifeline if I needed it. And even that was super helpful. From there, that kind of gave me a little bit of a safe space to be like, I have an outlet, I have somebody I can talk to, I have somebody who understands and can support me. And then I started exploring other avenues. So I really maybe it didn't quite come in college because, again, it was a different time, it was a different world and a different culture. But within the next decade, right, I read so many books about mental health, anxiety, depression, panic attacks, all of that. I listened to a lot of podcasts once those became popular. I read journal articles. I did eventually go to therapy. And I really prided myself upon basically taking an experimental approach to my own mental health. And I don't mean that in like a wacky way. I mean that in the sense of I was so desperate to find solutions that I said to myself, okay, Joni just said that, trying this one thing for your mental health can be helpful. Let me try that. Michael just said that this other thing can be helpful. And so I took all of those things seriously, and I tried many of them out, if not all of them. And where I'm going with this is basically to say, and this ties back into my first book. So the subtitle of that book is A Toolkit for Living with and Overcoming Anxiety. And the toolkit piece was basically a representation of the work that I did, right? The experimentation, to say, I've tried out all these different things. I've figured out which ones seem to work, which ones don't. And obviously different things work for different people. But in general, I think there are some methodologies that are more successful and some that are, less so. And I essentially compiled all of those things and I curated them and said, I'm writing this book. It talks about all the things that I tried. It talks about all the things that, helped me, that didn't help me. And also just kind of in the same sense of putting them all in front of the reader, like I did with myself. Because again, I know that if I say to somebody, hey, do some box breathing, right? That might work for 55% of people, but the other 45 are like, I don't like that strategy, or it doesn't help me, So I really wanted to just essentially encapsulate my own journey in the sense that I was doing this experimentation and figuring out what was most helpful. And I wanted to lay those strategies and tactics out for the reader in hopes that they would build their own mental health toolkit. So long-winded way of getting there, but let's just think about like a couple of the helpful things for now. And I did just say box breathing, so let's think about box breathing, right? When you think about anxiety, you actually like very quickly, if you do some research and all that, you find that it's pretty, tightly bound up in the nervous system, in the sense that you have an autonomic nervous system that sort of, operates on its own. It's meant to keep you alive. It's meant to help you survive and, reproduce and eat and digest and all of those things. And so within the autonomic nervous system, you have this thing called the sympathetic nervous system. That is the fight or flight nervous system, if you will. essentially, right, is that system is designed to get us out of scary and threatening situations. And so when we find ourselves in a scary or threatening situation, whether real or perceived, it's going to come online and make us feel all those symptoms, the racing heart, the sweating, the tunnel vision, all of that, right? When we're feeling that anxiety and that system has come online, what we're really looking for is to power that system back down. And so when you look at a lot of physiological research, you say, how do you turn off or suppress a little bit the sympathetic nervous system? You do that by regulating that nervous system. And one of the best ways to regulate it is to do some deep breathing and tap into what is known as the vagus nerve, right? So the vagus nerve activates when you get a deep exhale, a long, deep exhale. And so when you're doing this tactic called box breathing, there's all sorts of different ways that people talk about it. And what I would say is the idea is this is how I will pitch it, is you are trying to quote unquote build the sides of a box with your breath. So what you're going to do is there's going to be 4 segments, 4 sides. So you're going to say, I'm going to breathe in for a certain amount of time. That is side 1. I'm going to hold that breath for another amount of time. That's side 2. I'm then going to get a deep exhale for a certain amount of time. That's side 3. And then I'm going to hold again, and that's side 4. And the idea is when you're doing this methodically, when you're really saying to yourself, in, count to 5, hold, count to 5, out, count to 5, pause, count to 5, you're really making sure that you're getting that activation of the vagus nerve, right? You're slowing down and saying, I need to focus on this breath, right? Because what happens is a lot of the times that we are anxious, we hyperventilate or we don't breathe at all. And that sends a message back to our brains and our nervous systems that something's a little off, if not wrong entirely. And that message tells them to continue to rev up the sympathetic nervous system. So when you are feeling anxious, I know it's simple, I know it's a little bit simplistic, but when you're getting into that anxiety response, right? Try to sit there and say, okay, I'm going to do my box breath. I'm going to count the 4 sides of the box. I'm going to, whatever number we want to put on it, whether it's 4 seconds, 8 seconds on each side, go through that methodically. Try to get that reset or activation of the vagus nerve, which will hopefully get the sympathetic response to calm down a little bit. And once that system does calm down, we often find that the anxiety goes down with it a bit as well, because it's not that the sympathetic nervous system equals anxiety, but you almost kind of can't have anxiety without the sympathetic nervous system, just based on how our physiological wiring was put together.
And you teach exactly similar things to what I teach. And thank you for sharing. One of the things, and I know you were talking about it, but you didn't use the word. And I'm like, is he going to use it? Is he going to use the word? Right. But one of the things that I always love tapping into when I'm doing like crisis de-escalation or, as you said, trying to get when I'm trying to depress the sympathetic nervous system, I try to help people get tap into their parasympathetic nervous system. So as you were talking about, right, like that breathing, the vagus nerve, I tweak it a little bit. And as you said earlier, let me preface this, okay, to anybody who's listening or watching this. I'm not saying his way is wrong and my way is right, or his way is right and my way is wrong. No. As he said earlier, he has experimented with. Okay, let me preface that. He has experimented with and has found out. And so I'm gonna add on to what he's saying as also another technique that you can also use. But the parasympathetic nervous system is complete opposite, right, of the sympathetic nervous system. And so one of the things I help people do is when they're like way up here, I'll literally, I mean, this is something that I will modify slightly. But I will literally go up to somebody and be like, hey, can we just take a seat, please? Let's just please take a seat. Let's just converse over this. Let's talk about it. Because when they're sitting down, the parasympathetic nervous system is kicking in and it's helping them to go from here to here. So, yeah, I love the fact that you brought this up, because this is one of my favorite subjects as far as like, how do we go from a 10 to a 5? Let's get in some basic immediate skills to help us so that we can go from that extreme and get more in the middle, or get even more closer to a 2 or a 1 or a 3. Uh, so thank you for that. Thank you. Thank you for that. That is huge. A lot of people, I've met with a lot of, uh, I'm going to say, crisis de-escalators, a lot of clinicians, a lot of people like that. And you by far are one of the only ones that I have ever heard to talk about the importance of these systems. Yeah, I think you should probably go to school. Unsolicited advice here. You should go to school and get you a degree in crisis management, de-escalation, counseling, all of that. You will be a great crisis de-escalator.
I appreciate it. I would say I've done a lot of podcasts. I have written a lot, try to refine this message as much as I can. And so I certainly appreciate that. I feel like it does, humbly, it speaks to the amount of time that I put into it. One thing that you talked about that I really like, and honestly, like my current therapist, we work on this a lot, right? You talked about this sort of number system. My therapist and I will talk about it. We will call it climbing the ladder, in the sense that if we have this 0 to 10 or 1 to 10 scale of anxiety or fear of any emotion, right? It's very rare that, we'll say anxiety for now. It's very rare that you go from 0 out of 10 on anxiety to 10 out of 10 on anxiety in a heartbeat. Can it happen? Yes, it can. Does it happen very often? No, it does not. And so I like this approach because it makes you think, right, about when you say I'm climbing the ladder right now, it makes you think about your choices, your experiences, the things that you are doing in your life, and the amount of stress that you are putting on your system. So, you wake up, you see a scary news headline, and maybe that takes you from a 0 to a 3 on the anxiety scale. And then you go to work and you get some email that, maybe there's a deadline looming and the deadline just got even closer or whatever. And you go from a 3 to a 5. And so I love thinking about anxiety and other emotions too in this fashion, because it really shows you that there's a progression that we go through with all of these things, both on the way up and usually on the way down. And it makes you more mindful of those subtle changes and understanding that even though it feels like, hey, getting cut off in traffic is, it's very frustrating. You might get a little triggered in the moment, whatever, but you might also say to yourself, it's not the end of the world, whatever, right? The issue is that all of those things, all of those little stressors, or maybe even big stressors over the course of a day, they stack up and you start climbing that ladder. And then at some point, you tip to a 10, right? And a lot of people will say, hey, I fell into this panic attack out of nowhere, right? And again, it could happen, but is that the norm? Usually not. Usually what happens is you go from a 0 to a 3 to a 5 to a 6, and then something tips you from 6 to 10, 8 to 10, whatever it is, right? So I like thinking about anxiety and all the other different emotions, negative emotions, in this fashion, because it really makes you take a critical eye to the things that you do in your life, right? And you say to yourself, like I say to myself, okay, so we walked through the thing about, the autonomic nervous system, the acute stress response, fight or flight, and whatnot. And if anxiety is fed by the activation of that system, and we go back and we say the acute stress response, right? Then the more stress that you are taking on, the more that acute stress response is heightening. And if that thing heightens and heightens and heightens some more, eventually you find yourself at a 10 out of 10 on the anxiety scale. So it's really important, right, for us to be mindful, to think critically, to step back and say to ourselves, I don't know on what cadence, but maybe daily, maybe weekly, maybe monthly. Ask yourself, like, what am I doing? Am I taking on too many tasks? Am I too stressed out in general? What does my day look like? What does my life look like? And do I constantly find myself tipping into that 10 out of 10? I had to have gotten there somehow. It's not like I'm going from 0 out of 10, 0 to 10 in an instant all the time, because that's just really not quite how it works. So how am I getting there on a regular basis? What are those little increments and those little steps up the ladder? The more that we take that critical eye, I think we're more likely to, make some choices that support us and support our mental health, and make it so that maybe on a regular basis, we only get to a 6 instead of a 10, and it looks like simple work. It looks like a little too easy or a little too basic. But again, like it's all comes back to the nervous system, the acute stress response. And we really have to be careful with those systems, right? Because the more stress that we put on ourselves, the more those things activate and the more anxiety we're going to feel and experience.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it is about being aware. And if I can practice some type of cognitive awareness in the moment that I'm climbing this ladder, the chances of me being able to implement a tool at my disposal is higher, right? I typically explain this to folks. There is a difference between an emotional reaction and a cognitive reaction, and that difference is about 4 neurons. And that one neuron for the emotion, it literally is quick, right? And with the cognitive process, those 5 neurons have to travel from the middle of the brain to the frontal lobe before we can think, right? Before we can cognitively process. And so always stress, like when a situation happens, work toward putting a delay in your reaction so you can give yourself some time to process cognitively, so that you don't let anxiety or anger or fear control your lifestyle, control your decision making. So I love the fact that you brought that up, because I think it's critically important. Absolutely. So what have you found besides the box breathing to help you now, right? Because we're talking about, I think you said '08 to now, so that's like 16, 17 years. What have you found now that helps you to manage the anxiety?
Yeah, definitely. I have so much to say that I struggle to pick a lane, how I think I would attack this is in saying that, just like we just talked about a ladder of 0 to 10, there is a spectrum or a gradient here, on the anxiety management front, where we have acute level tactics and we have high level stuff, and so the high level stuff is more, especially, and I guess I'm trying to answer the question for myself. The high level stuff is like, what are the things that I'm doing on a daily basis that help me cultivate a lifestyle where there is less anxiety in it, where I am more calm, all that kind of thing, right? So for me, those things are like, what does that boil down to? That boils down to trying to build in sessions for meditation. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen every day, but I certainly try to make it happen a few times a week. Making sure that I get regular exercise, whether that's walking, running, yoga, weightlifting. There's a ton of science and research there showing that like exercise can be just as effective, if not more effective, than antidepressants or SSRIs. And that is not me saying, like just exercise, don't take your SSRIs. That is actually me saying that the drug thing is actually a conversation that you and your doctor have, and that's between the two of you. The exercise thing can be something that adds to your repertoire, right? So you get your walk, you get your weightlifting session in, you go for a run, right? You're really modulating and regulating your neurotransmitters and making it such that like adrenaline and cortisol are not running your life, not running the show. And those are two of the most prominent, neurotransmitters or hormones that are coursing through your body when you're feeling anxious and when you're feeling fearful. So we've got on the high side, right, or the high level, meditation, medication, exercise. One thing that I sometimes talk about that, it's not going to land with everybody. I totally get that. But thinking about like what food you put into your body. And what I will say, right, is like kind of the analogy that's, maybe it's a little overused, I don't know, but the idea that like you wouldn't put bad gas into a sports car and expect it to drive the same way, right? If you have a car that doesn't run on diesel, you don't put diesel into it, and so that would be the first piece, is to say that if you want to, operate efficiently and you want your body to perform well, you got to put foods in there that are going to help it do that. So, going back and thinking about like, what are those things, right? I always come back to the idea that So there's this, oh geez, there's this thing called the Lindy effect, which is basically this phenomenon that says that anything that has been in existence for a long time is more likely to stay in existence, right? So I kind of map that onto my entire life perspective. And I say to myself, okay, if there are things that we have been doing for a long time, there's a reason for that. And those things are also likely to stick around in our behavior or, in the zeitgeist for a while, right? So thinking about the food that we eat, I'm like, what did we eat what did humans eat 20,000 years ago? What did they eat 500,000 years ago? Not really a surprise, but it would be natural foods, whole foods, foods that aren't subjected to a lot of processing, a lot of chemicals and artificial ingredients and that kind of thing. And so you think about it, it's like I'm certainly not advocating that we go eat a bunch of grass, but you look at our closest ancestor, the chimpanzee, and maybe the gorilla, right? They eat a ton of grass and they are so strong because all they do all day is eat grass. Now, obviously, we don't have time to eat grass all day, but I think the message that I'm trying to get through there is basically saying that, they eat natural foods, they eat whole foods, they eat foods that are available to them out in the wild. When we do that, we are kind of proverbially putting that good gas into our systems, if you will. The second piece that I want to talk about here is mapping this directly to our mental health. So sort of like the coda of that first piece is saying, like, if you want your body to operate efficiently, successfully, all that sort of thing, you got to eat the right foods. And in operating successfully, efficiently, all that is your brain needs to operate successfully and efficiently in order for you to not feel so many negative emotions, right? If you are dysregulated, if you're, not feeling the right way, it's usually a result. I mean, there's many things that it could be, but I guess I'll say it this other way is if you are giving your body the wrong things, then it's not going to have the basic ingredients it needs to create a healthy environment and produce the right level of neurotransmitters and hormones and all of that. And when those things fall out of line, that's when we start to experience difficult conditions, maybe like anxiety or depression, right? A doctor may sometimes say, oh, you have a chemical imbalance. And that could very well be true. But that chemical imbalance can come from many different places, especially if we are not providing our bodies with the right raw materials that they need. So that leads me into the second point, which is basically to say that, you think about how much energy you have on a daily basis. Like, you have a certain amount of energy that you can expend to do the things that you need to do. That is true on the physical level. That is true on the mental level, spiritual, emotional, whatever you want to say. When we think about, okay, I go to the pizza shop, I eat a large pizza, mozzarella sticks, a Coke, whatever. It's delicious. However, on the other side of that is a good chance that we're not going to feel so great. And so what ends up happening in that situation is we take that limited amount of energy that we have. One, a lot of that energy is going to the digestion of those heavy, dense foods. And two, a lot of that energy also goes to us focusing on the fact that we don't feel well physically. And when we don't feel well physically and we're focusing on it, I'm not saying don't focus on it, because what else can you do in that situation? It hurts. But that means that we kind of have to abandon, our proverbial posts in our minds, right? We can't be sitting there saying, okay, here's where I got to be mindful. Here's where I got to, say my mantra to myself. Here's where I got to work through my anxiety. You are focused on your physical body. And that means you're going to, again, abandon that post in your mind, which means you're more likely to experience those negative emotions that you don't want to experience, because you can't stand there and protect yourself from them or run the tactics and strategies that you otherwise would, right? So this is a high level strategy, but I guess to cap it all off, I would say eat the things that make you feel good. Eat the things, and I mean that both in terms of the emotions you get, but also the physical piece afterwards. And then also eat the foods that help your body operate in a efficient and successful way. And then make it such that you're not enduring all kinds of physical pain on a regular basis that draws you away from the mental battle, And so those are some high level things that obviously I wanted to present. We can go into some stuff on the other side of the gradient, the more acute or tactical stuff. But I know I talked for a while there, so I want to pause and see if you have any questions.
No, I'm just wow. I'm baffled at the information that you are providing to us, because so I get that it is a, a lot of our physical health, mental health, spiritual, emotional health is there's a relationship between brain and gut and brain, whatever that phrase is. And I get that approximately 90% of healthcare problems in the US is preventative. And one of the biggest things about it is exercise, eating right, like being actually active, right? And I am the world's worst at not being as active as I used to be. I'm not even going to lie, because if I got the opportunity to eat a pizza, I'm going to load me up a pizza. I mean, pizza's good. But as you said, like when I'm done, I just feel like, oh gosh. Like I'm just feeling like that. But now, if I were to make me a smoothie with peanut butter, yogurt, uh, fruits, strawberry, blackberry, blueberry, raspberry, bananas, um, and then whatever else I decide to throw in there, spinach, whatever, it doesn't matter. If I go and actually make me a smoothie, I'm not going to feel, oh God, oh my stomach. I'm going to feel full for one, right? But it's going to be a healthier full, because I'm gonna be like, man, like that really kind of, gives me the energy I need. I'm gonna feel that genuine energy as you were describing, right? I'm not going to feel like that emotionally. I'm not going to feel like I'm a glum lot when I eat healthy food. And I'm aware of that just because I had to live off of smoothies for 2 years. I couldn't swallow. I struggled swallowing. So the only way I could live and actually breathe was smoothies, right? It kept me alive for literally 2 years, all roughly, give or take. So, but during that 2 years, I was actually, man, I lost a lot of weight, but but I was putting the right foods into my body. Now, every once in a while, I would go through and I'd, blend up some breakfast sausage, egg, and cheese, biscuit, whatever. I'd blend it up and eat it. But for the most part, it was fruits. My protein was peanut butter. I mean, and it was healthy foods. But so for the most part, for that 2 years, physically, I felt great. Now, I hated the fact I couldn't eat, I couldn't swallow, right? But energetically, naturally, it was that natural stuff that you were talking about, that you had just shared with us, that natural energy, that it was good stuff. It was good food. It was that good energy. So I appreciate you sharing that, because it does impact. It impacts every aspect of our lives. Absolutely.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
doubt. And, I think if we kept going down this thread, right, we would talk about sleep as well. And the fact that, when we are tired, right, it's basically that the parts of our brains that are, more associated with fear, right, the amygdala, the reptilian brain, if you will, they are able to kind of wrestle control of our prefrontal cortices and our executive function when we're tired. And so the less sleep that you get, I think a lot of people will know this firsthand, is when you're tired, that anxiety is revving up and it stinks. And so, all of this, like I think about how you talked about the pizza, right? I don't want any of this from me to sound judgmental. It's absolutely not. It's actually a math equation. It's really, if you like the pizza and it makes you feel better overall than some alternative, then you go with the pizza. But if you're constantly finding yourself in that state of, well, I ate the pizza and I had a nice high, but then I felt like crap an hour later, then maybe, think about those decisions and see what some alternatives might bring you. So again, it's not to say to folks, don't eat this, don't eat that. It's understand that you have more power and more control than you would maybe otherwise realize or understand or acknowledge, and just bring some of that power to the decisions that you make every day, right? You don't necessarily need to engage in all the same habits that you've been engaging your whole life. Actually, that's, how you change things, how you improve things is you question things a little bit. You make some changes, you see where things work better for you, and then you lean into those changes, right? So again, if the pizza is what works best for everybody, then I am certainly not here to judge. I am just saying that, if you're really looking to get leverage over yourself, right? And that leverage comes from emotion. So if you are constantly finding yourself in that state of whether it's a lot of anxiety or stomach aches or headaches or whatever, right? And I'm not saying that all of those things boil down to, a pizza or whatever. But when you find yourself in that pain again and again, and you're like, oh, I know that I would feel better if I just did X, Y, Z, right? If I just ate, or if I had a smoothie or a salad instead of this pizza. When you finally come to some conclusions like that, again, it's not like all of them are perfect or that we can always say this will always equal that. But when you start to gather that information and say to yourself, I'm more likely to feel better if I eat the salad, overall than the pizza, that's when you can start to make some of those choices, right? And eventually you start changing your lifestyle a little bit and you look back and you say, wow, like maybe my anxiety is 25% better or 50% better or whatever. I'm just trying to empower people and let them know that like they can make choices that better affect their life, and it's not always these grand things, right? A lot of it comes down to eating right, moving your body on a regular basis, sleeping right, giving yourself, that stress reduction, taking pauses during the day, just building in these little wins that allow us to, if I may go back to the analogy from earlier, if we're always at that 10 out of 10 on the ladder of anxiety, we start to make some of these changes and then we look and we say, okay, now I'm only getting to a 6 each day. And, it's not always a linear path of, well, I was at 10 and now it's constantly 6. There will still be some days that are 10s, but you're trying to figure out what the trend line is, right? And say, I used to average a 7.5 for the last 60 days. And then 60 days later, I look back and I'm at 6.5, and so that's what you're trying to do is you're trying to bring that trend line down, impact your mental health in a positive fashion, make the choices that are lastingly, most powerful for you. Because again, that pizza, no judgment, that pizza tastes amazing. But if you are constantly on the other side of that pizza, finding yourself in that dark hole, then, it behooves you to question that a little bit and think about, could I make a better decision here?
No, I definitely would agree with you on that 100%. We're not knocking any food product here. Okay. Absolutely none. On my Christmas list every year, where your job gives you this thing, what do you want? What's your favorite this? What's your favorite that? My only response is across the board is anything peanut butter. I'm a peanut butter junkie, so that's just how I roll. But no, you're right. The body knows. I am of the theory that the body knows and likes what it knows and likes and what is good for it. And I say that because my personal experience, um, it was during Hurricane Floyd. This was back in '99. I was at my mom sent us somewhere to go stay during the hurricane so she could work and we would be safe. I remember they ended up cooking up some old oh gosh, again, I'm not judging here food, okay? I know you're not, but this is just my experience, and I know my body will reject it every single time it's put in front of me. But man, they cooked some nasty old chicken gizzards and liver and everything else. I took a half a bite of that, and my body just complete disgusted for me, and I've never eaten it since. Right. And there's a lot of food products that I just won't touch just because it's not appealing, whether it's to the body or even whether it's to the eye. Right. And I stress to the eye because if it looks good, we're going to eat it. Right? We always eat with the eyes first. It doesn't matter what the food dish is. We're always going to eat with the eyes. And so I'm glad that we actually did get on this topic because I think it's important. The food and what we put into our body is very important. And I'd like to use this analogy too, right? Or not this analogy, but this example. When we talk about putting food into our body, like let's look at recovery, right? From anxiety, mental health, depression, substance use. Am I going to continue to be around the things and the people that are unhealthy for me, that worsen my quality of life? Or am I going to make changes to improve my quality of life? Am I going to the bar every night versus am I at home watching TV and spending time with the family? Am I at work every morning at 8 a.m. or whatever time? This, that, and the third, right? Uh, am I, practicing some tools to help bring down my anxiety? So everything that you're sharing, I think, could be applied to the idea of what am I putting into my life to make it better, to make my life better. Can you binge on pizza once a weekend or once a month? Absolutely. Can you binge on, maybe going to play pool with your, in a healthy environment? Absolutely. Recovery is not a glum lie. It doesn't mean stay away from M&Ms. No, like that's nowhere near what we're saying at all. And I want to stress that, like neither one of us is saying that at all. It's about living a healthier quality life. And I think that's what it boils down to.
I think it does too. And you made me think of something that I find fascinating, and I do want to say it. I'd be curious to get your take, right? Some people are of the belief that with addiction and recovery, let's say, you or I is an alcoholic, or we know somebody who's an alcoholic. I've heard people say before, I'm still an alcoholic even though I'm recovered from it. I just found different and healthier addictions, right? So it sometimes can become, somebody has been drinking for a long time. They basically, and I've been through this a little bit myself as well. Like you kind of get to the point where you see that if you struggle with, a substance or addiction or whatever, you almost have like this circuitry in your brain that represents, addiction or being addicted to things, right? It's almost like a pattern, a behavior, that kind of thing. And one of the helpful things in recovery, and I think a lot of people, a situation or we'll say a situation that they find themselves getting into is essentially trading the unhealthy addiction for something else, right? So if you talk to somebody who is recovered, they may say, again, I'm still an alcoholic. I have just replaced alcohol with running marathons, running a company, doing some ambitious thing on a regular basis. And I think about that all the time, right? Where I definitely have addictive tendencies, where there are many things in my life that I have gotten addicted to over time. And I think, to a degree, that is human nature, right? Especially depending on what the thing is. Like, it's very easy to get addicted to video games. They're a lot of fun. You know what I mean? But I know that I used to drink a lot. Not necessarily alcoholic level, but I used it as a crutch, most definitely. And it took a lot to get out of that, and I think for a lot of folks who are listening, if they're in college or they are recently graduated, right? You go to college, you kind of find yourself in a situation where by the book, the definition in the book, whatever the book is, maybe the dictionary, you're basically an alcoholic. You know what I mean? You drink heavily 2, 3, 4 nights a week, and yet it's socially accepted, so you don't question it. And then at some point you get older and those, you go out with people and just things start changing, right? Maybe you become 25 or 30 or whatever. And the friend group starts saying, oh my goodness, like look at so-and-so, they still drink way too much. They haven't figured it out yet, right? And obviously there's growth and maturing to do and all that. Like all of us are growing up and trying to figure out our own way in life. But I look at that specific example, and maybe not all of us were quote unquote official addicts, but a lot of us, right, who grew out of that that sort of pattern in college or post college of drinking a lot, we found other things to get addicted to, right? Our jobs, our families, again, running marathons, going to CrossFit, whatever it is. And so at the very least, like I would say, one, I want to put this on the table, but two, I also want to pose to folks that if this is a pattern that plays itself out often for addicts or even folks who just have addictive tendencies, then maybe, right? Maybe folks who are listening and are still struggling with this sort of thing, I would invite you to think about what could become your new addiction or your replacement addiction, right? Find something that is a bit healthier, if not actually healthy, to take the place of the substance, right? So for me, again, I work a lot. I might be a workaholic. I don't know. I write, I work on my books and my brand a lot. I do a lot of podcasting. I'm always doing something. And if I could really, like for myself, if I could break this down, I would say I have a pattern in my mind has always been a bit of a dark and scary place. And when I was really young, I'd say, hey, let's go drink, because when I drink, my mind isn't so dark and scary anymore. You get to some point in your life where you're like, oh, I can't keep drinking in the same capacity that I used to, But if I don't find something else to replace the drinking with, my mind is still going to just destroy me, And so there were years where I was like, during COVID especially, I didn't drink at all. And yet, like, I wasn't working super hard. I had a lot of downtime. And I thought to myself, hey, I've been busy for a long time. All I've ever wanted is to, not be busy and just chill and relax and have a good time. And even though that can be great for certain people, I know the way that my own mind works. And if I'm not busy, my mind is tearing me apart. And so maybe, the fact that I work a lot, the fact that I always keep a busy schedule goes back to the fact that I have these patterns in my mind, right? My mind runs a certain way. At some point in my life, I consciously or subconsciously said to myself, there are many ways that you can deal with that scary mind, right? You can go down the path of drinking every day or a lot of days, or you can find some healthier habits, some healthier addictions, and you can kind of do as the adage or whatever you want to call it says, which is to replace the alcohol with some other addiction. Is it 100% healing? I don't know if I'd necessarily say that, but I can confidently say that I am in a better place than I was 15 years ago. And so from that angle, I think it's interesting to pose to the listeners and say, if you're dealing with something on the substance front, like, what is something that you could replace it with? Because maybe that would get you on a healthier path.
And I will preface this because you did ask me, you wanted my feedback. I don't know. There's two different competing theories. One is one's an alcoholic, one's an addict, always an addict or alcoholic. The other one doesn't say that there's really a cure, but it says that, when you recover, you have recovered, like past tense recovered, right? And so I say that to say this. I'm not an expert in saying that one or the other is the solidified solution there 100%. I can look at the evidence on both and say I get it. But I will preface that with also this. You shared a lot too, and part of where my mind went as you were talking was looking at life in our experiences, whether it's food, whether it's anxiety, depression, things like that, taking an existential approach to it and asking some of the most fundamental questions that should be asked, right? And of course, it's mostly about life, but change it up and make it related to your situation. What about the situation is giving me anxiety? What does this anxiety mean? What is it telling me? What does this drinking mean to me? What is it doing for me? And really trying to dig into the meaning of it, because as you said earlier, this is when we first started, that anxiety is normal, fear is normal, anger, sadness, happiness, mirth. Mirth is a new emotion. Researchers are trying to say is also universal. I mean, so regardless of the emotion, they're all normal, right? And so my challenge to everybody who's listening is ask yourself what this emotion is saying. what does this mean to me? Because every emotion is trying to tell you something. It's there for a reason. As you said, 500,000 years ago, how did our folks eat? How did we eat? How did we survive? How did we view things? Right? How did we see things? What was our perspective on things? And so everything that we are talking about should, I think, starts at the most fundamental basic level of, what does this do for me? What does this mean for me? What is this telling me? What is this informing me of? And so that's the way I take a substance use and addiction. I used to tackle it in my clinical practice from a medical perspective and say, "Oh my God, it's a brain disease, just that and the third, blah blah." No, I'd be lying if I told you I believe that it was a brain disease. I think it's a condition of that meaning and that hope, and that really, I mean, that's really the fundamentals of it. I drink because it makes me feel good. I drink because I have less social anxiety. I drink because I feel a part of. I use this because of this. Now, I will say too, part of that is there's a difference between addiction and actual dependence. Dependence, I do believe, goes back into more on the medical side, because now I'm drinking to stop the withdrawals. I'm no longer drinking to feel a part of. I'm drinking to stop the withdrawals. I'm no longer using opioids, heroin, Percocets, Lorcets, or whatever to feel a part of, to feel this emptiness inside of me, as much as, or whatever that thing is that I'm trying to, feel, escape, or whatever. I'm using to stop me from going into physiological withdrawals, right? I'm not using benzos because it makes me feel down and I'm so hyper or what have you. I'm using benzos because if I go into withdrawals, the potentials of me dying from it is pretty high, right? And so I want to, make sure that question is answered too. There's a difference between addiction and dependence. And so in addiction, it is about finding that meaning and hope, because that's the cornerstone of recovery. It's the cornerstone of growth, right? It's just that reflection process. As you said earlier, when we were talking about the food, if pizza makes you feel great, good. You don't have to take it out of your life, but try a salad, try something else, try a bowl of ice cream, try something, right? Like, reflect on your food experiences. Growth is growth, recovery is recovery. That's, I definitely second everything that you said, 100%.
Yeah, it's all based in mindfulness, right? Thinking about, okay, where do I put my attention? If I bring my attention to the specific subject, whether it's, using a substance or a certain food that I eat, I just want to make sure that folks are putting their attention on that thing and asking those questions, right? Getting to the point of saying, what might make me feel a different way? What does this mean? What might it mean to do something different? And wrapped up in mindfulness is often this thing called cognitive behavioral therapy, which is, a form of treatment where we look at the things that we say to ourselves. So it's essentially the way that we think, the way that we feel, and the way that we act. And in the CBT world, there is this thing called the CBT triangle. And so the three things that I just mentioned, think, feel, and act, those form the 3 points of the triangle, right? And the idea is essentially that all three of those things influence one another. But if we're able to go in and change any one of those things, then we're going to impact all of them. And often, like you'll go back and, look at, I guess, I believe it's Aaron Beck was the father of cognitive therapy, and through his work, and then there was also behavioral therapy. Those two things came together and formed cognitive behavioral therapy. But Beck would often say that, like, the easiest thing to change is your thoughts and how you talk to yourself, right? So it's very hard to just get up and say, I'm just gonna eat something different, or I'm gonna run a 5K or whatever. But if it's like when you start talking to yourself in a more understanding or compassionate way, then you start to change how you feel. And when those feelings build, then you start to change how you act, right? And so it's those baby steps of saying, I bring my mindfulness to this situation. I ask myself what this means. If I don't like what it means, then I can reevaluate that, and I can talk to myself in a different fashion, and I can think different thoughts. And it, again, some of these things are simplistic. It's not necessarily meant to be that way. It's not like all sunshine and rainbows or whatever, but it's it's these little baby steps of saying, okay, I talk to myself in a slightly more positive fashion day after day after day. Eventually I feel a little bit better. And as I feel a little bit better, I'm going to be doing things that are improving my life a little bit more. And so, it's interesting. Another thing that came to mind when you were talking earlier was, thinking about impulsiveness and reacting to things too quickly and whatnot. And there is a quote that comes from Viktor Frankl. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning, which is, I mean, it's a really tough read because, it's his experiences going through the Holocaust, going through, concentration camps and whatnot. But I mean, the sheer fortitude of this dude, like it's so moving. It's crazy. He basically got through to the other side of living through a concentration camp, and he was a psychiatrist and wrote about his experiences and essentially came down to this statement that said, between the stimulus and your reaction is where all your power lies, right? So when we say that somebody is impulsive, what we're really saying is there is a stimulus and they act on that stimulus really quickly. That stimulus might be an external event. It might be your friend saying something to you. It might be you having a thought and acting on it immediately. When you slow down and you put space between that stimulus, whatever it is, and your reaction, you allow yourself to be more mindful. You allow yourself to work in the CBT principles and ask yourself, what does this mean? How should I be thinking about this? How should I be talking to myself? And then from there, right in that gap, you put the triangle and you say, I'm going to think in a slightly different fashion. I'm going to feel a little bit better about this situation. And then I'm going to take some different, more positive action as a result. And I think even though that is very basic, bringing that into our lives, bringing, the lessons of mindfulness and CBT into our lives can get us really far, even though they are both simplistic ideas.
No, absolutely. I couldn't have worded it any different. And I love the fact that you brought up Viktor Frankl. He's one of my favorite theorists, philosophers, psychiatrists, the whole nine. He goes by all of them. And existentialism isn't, it's more of a philosophy than it is actual psychotherapy. But many people practice it. Many clinicians and therapists and psychiatrists, psychologists do practice it. And so, yeah, like that made my freaking day right there. I love it. I love it. So, yeah, look, let's start trying to wrap up. Okay. I want to know a couple of things, right? One is, if people want to find you for speaking, mentoring, even hire you in your organization, anything of that sort, they want to, reach out to you, maybe ask you some questions. What are some ways they can contact you? And where can they find your book at?
Yeah, I appreciate you giving me a plug. I would go to getoutofyourhead.com. So that's my website. There is a contact page or form there. So you can reach out to me through that. You can also find me on social media. You could look on Instagram. The handle that I do most of the book stuff through is Get Out of Your Head. So both places, Get Out of Your Head, no dashes, no underscores. Finding the books are available through most of the major retailers. I will say online, not necessarily in the stores, but online, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Apple, Kobo, all that. So you can definitely get yourself a digital copy at any of those places. Physical, I think, is usually is only through Amazon at the moment. But yeah, definitely check out those places. And again, I appreciate you giving me a plug.
No, absolutely, man. Because look, we're gonna, in the next several interviews, we're gonna be covering a whole lot. So next question then. If there's one thing you want somebody to take away from this, what would that one thing be?
I mean, obviously we talked about a lot of different things. And so it's hard to pick one, but I do think that, especially with the subject that your podcast normally centers on and some of the stuff that we talked about, is those larger issues in your life that seem as though, maybe you push them down, maybe you ignore them, maybe, the issue that you are dealing with seems like the issue, but maybe it's something deeper, right? So maybe if you drink a lot, maybe there's a feeling underneath that that you are covering up or hiding. I'm not saying that it is easy. I'm certainly not, because there's a lot of trauma that people go through. There are horrible experiences. Life is really hard. I think most people are just trying to get by. At the same time, making progress, right? Instead of going from incremental level to really have a paradigm shift, to make a significant leap up in your mental health and your well-being and all of that, you probably need to do some of that digging, right? And ask yourself, why am I doing X, Y, Z? Why do I keep finding myself going back to the alcohol or to the drugs or whatever it may be? Again, it's difficult, and you may even need, a therapist or a psychiatrist to work through some of this stuff, and often you probably will. But that's where I would say probably the most juice is going to be.
Definitely, absolutely. And one of the most important questions you're probably going to be asked today: what is your call to action for people?
Call to action, just because, it's a little bit of a cop out, but call to action is get out of your head, right? Find ways, and I know it sounds a bit flippant, but find ways to put the thoughts down, to focus on something else, right? I understand, I am right there with most of the folks who are listening. Like, if you struggle with anxiety, if you struggle with depression, every day can be and often is a battle, and I'm not trying to sugarcoat that or make light of it or anything like that, but think about, putting one foot in front of the other and kind of sinking into just some tasks in front of you, right? If you're going to the gym, try to be present at the gym, lift the weights, have a good time, escape that, the clutches of your mind, even if it's for 5 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever it is. I'll tell you that I have lived in the caverns of my own mind for many years. Not so much these days, but certainly when I was going through all the stuff that eventually inspired me to write my books, I went through a lot there, and spent a lot of time in my own mind. And I'm not saying that there wasn't purpose or value to that, to, maybe teach me something that then I integrated into my lifestyle or whatever. But I know that the longer that you live there in general, the more pain you are probably going to experience. And so it's certainly not easy, and I'm not trying to be flippant or anything like that. But at the same time, if you are struggling with anxiety, if you're struggling with depression, try to find ways to cultivate that idea and get out of your head for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes. We always want to go back to, critical thinking our way through these feelings. And yet often what happens is when we finally give ourselves permission to put them down, or we just, something stumbles across our path that forces us to put them down, we feel better. And then we come back and we're like, wow, that's interesting. Why do I feel better? I actually stopped thinking about anxiety when I was trying to solve it. I didn't solve it yet, So yeah, that's my takeaway. My call to action is find some ways. They can be very small. They can be 5 minutes. They can be 30 minutes today. Find some ways to get out of your head. Give yourself permission to get out of your head, and just see how you do with that.
Well said. That was well said. Get out of your head. Folks, you heard it from the one and only. Sir, I'd like to thank you again for coming on. I sincerely and humbly do appreciate it. And yeah, thank you for helping us tackle and break barriers and stigmas and bringing education and knowledge to the world. Do appreciate it. Thank you for being a part of this mission.
You're welcome, Kevin, and thanks for having me.